Another video in support of the Walking the Walk mission. This one's going to be on the economy and what changes or proposals for change that might be out there. I'm soliciting your contribution, video responses and such. The last video I posted on politics didn't do too well, not too many damn responses, so it's hard to make a compilation video when there's no comp to emulate. So anyway, post a link over there if you do have any political ideas regarding voting systems and such, and how we create a sustainable, civilly useful government in this world. And this video is on the economy basically, and I'll just generically state that we're just basically given these two extremes, capitalism and communism or socialism, and everybody thinks it has to be one or the other, that there's no other formula for how we should regulate commerce and how we compensate people for their contributions. And it's just kind of silly that no one thinks any farther than that. Generically, the idea is to have efficient production. Usually, sometimes that means production on a large scale to maximize efficiency. And the idea is to create this efficient line between that production and the consumer, so we don't have any sloppiness or middlemen and bullshit in between the consumer and that production. And then it's the idea is also, I think, to have a mechanism of production, a business, if you want to call it that, that is efficient itself, that rewards people equitably and appropriately for their contributions, that provides incentives, that gives people a life being productive, that is meaningful work and rewarding work. And that's basically what the game is.
It's all supply and demand. Demand will force supply to be created, and you want that supply, though, to be have the incentive to fulfill the demand efficiently, not to have the incentive to make somebody a billionaire. I mean, that shouldn't be the goal. The goal is to have efficient production that satisfies supply in an efficient manner. That's how you have green policy, and that's how you have human policy. So anyway, let's go through our capitalist system. Is built out of nonsense. I mean, the rewards and the incentives are all screwed up. I mean, the idea is to create what I would call incentive economics, to always give people incentive to produce more, to do more, and it's that simple, but never give them too much incentive. The idea is to equitably distribute the incentive carrots, because that's what motivates people, is incentives. And I don't think there has to be too many sticks in the economy, to whip people with. That it all should be based on incentives, and the practical understanding that business doesn't exist to exploit human beings. I mean, that's not its mission, that's not a legitimate purpose of it. That its legitimate purpose is to fairly treat human beings, not to just take advantage. Well, so there's 10 million too many of a certain kind of people, so we have an excuse now to exploit them. I mean, that's just nonsense logic. Work should have value, and the value shouldn't be dependent on how many desperate souls there are seeking that work. I mean, it's just, that's where capitalist goes wrong. That's where capitalism breaks down. It has no human ethics. It has no notion of decency and fairness. It is, and so it can't do right by the human race in many ways, because it just doesn't have the regulatory rationale to do that. It doesn't have the intelligence to understand that its obligation goes beyond making money, and that just making money isn't good enough, because that just will lead to exploitation and abuse. If that's your only ambition in life, you make money, you just whack people over the head and take their money. And it's a very efficient business. Just go out and steal it, And that's basically what capitalism often does. They will lie, cheat, and steal to get their money, and that's all they've become. Not all, but primarily. It's too profit-driven, and it's not driven by a higher aspiration, and the incentives, the competitive incentives in the business sphere is lowest common denominator. I mean, you go as low as your competition will go, and that's what you're required to do. And that's an insane incentive. No one can argue or defend it. It is not let loose, let free. That's what you'll get. Everything will run to the cheapest, shoddiest, sloppiest, not to the most efficient, grandest, fairest, most decent. Those two are the opposite extremes, and capitalism is always going to degrade itself and humiliate itself by chasing the lowest ethic, not the highest ethic. And you would also, in every business, you would create proportional incentives, not extreme or not lottery type incentives, but proportional incentives for every person to advance themselves or do better. And there doesn't need to be any, lottery payoffs to keep people interested. People work just as hard for their first $1 million as they would for $1 billion. So there's absolutely no reason to provide $1 billion incentives when you can seduce people to do the work for $1 million. So that most businesses, if you look at them, they could run and operate perfectly fine without the shareholders or the, even the CEOs are often unnecessary baggage, overpriced baggage. For the price that paid for the average CEO, you could buy 30 or 40 college graduates and pay them a decent and very satisfactory salary. And there's no argument, I don't think, that those 30 or 40 people wouldn't have a combined intelligence much greater than the average CEO. The way the game is played now, it's capitalism, and the people who hold the capital are the people that run the economy. And a lot of these people, maybe up to 50% of them actually by statistical analysis, are people who never worked. Okay, they inherited their ownership of that capital. They own that ownership of production. And so the first thing to get rid of is that obscenity. If we're going to have any kind of economic system, I've made analogies to this 4,000 times, but I'll do it again. If you're having a horse race, you do not put half the horses halfway down the track, and then a quarter of the horses 3/4 of the way down the track, and then 5% of the horses right at the finish line, and then say you're going to have a good race. Because you're not going to have a good race. You're going to have a race that's just bullshit, just flat out bullshit. And there's no reason to allow nepotism to control our economy or how our economy runs. It's nonsense. So I would abolish inheritance altogether, but I mean, I have to be pragmatic. So I think it's quite reasonable to propose that there would be no inheritance over a certain maximum of $10 million or whatever. No estate could give out more than $10 million or $15 million, and that would be it. And the rest would be either directly put back into the economy through the government, or else just the resources could be just burned, for that matter, destroyed, and everybody else's dollars would become more valuable proportionally. But there's no reason to allow one individual's extraordinary or preposterous success to become a legacy, for it to become a nobility or a royalty that's passed down generation to generation, and that basically takes those people out of the productive economy and just makes them emperors and lords. It's just preposterous to have a system like that. It's worse than the worst welfare state. And when you think of how much capital is in those hands, and if that capital, which capital is basically incentive carrots. Let's remember that analogy. Money is a carrot. Money is an incentive. And if you put that capital incentives back into the workforce, back into the general public's incentive carrots available to them, you can get more productive work out of the human beings available. And obviously, the people, if they don't have this guarantee of a life of luxury and laziness, they may become more productive themselves. These people who have inherited their wealth and just waste their Harvard degrees on the golf course, maybe they'd actually do some productive work that would benefit society, rather than just investing money in this stock market game. The other argument I would make against inheritance is that we've left it to be it's all good, no bad kind of thing. Capitalists play games with money, they play games with people's lives. There's risks involved. And when those risks don't pay off, who has to pay for it? Well, the general public ends up paying for it. Failures end up having to be subsidized by every other consumer, because if a business goes bankrupt and doesn't pay its creditors, then those businesses that were the creditors have to make up that loss from the rest of the population. So we pay for their failures. The general public pays for the failures. Every human being pays for the failures. So if you're going to have inheritance where the spawn of the rich are allowed to inherit all the benefits, well, why don't you allow them to inherit the risks? Why don't you allow them to inherit the failures? So when there's a failure, let that next generation have to pay that bill. And so let's say that any second generation of that family, once they had a sustainable income above, providing for themselves, you would highly tax the rest of their income to pay back their debt, the debt that their family owes. You could do that also with the welfare state. It might discourage some people who aren't in a position to have children from having children. If you decide that, look, if you're going to take welfare, your kids are going to have that liability, and they're going to have to pay the money back in the future. So if those children get to a point where they have a good income, they would have a responsibility to pay back proportionally some portion of their income over time to pay back what was invested in their family. And that might discourage people, like I said, who don't have the means from the reckless decision to force the general public to finance their reproductive decisions. But anyway, it's about fairness, and it's very easy to look at this system and say, no, it is not fair. It is just preposterously silly to think that Bill Gates is, 40 million times a better person than the average man working for a living. That's what it comes down to. There's just no reason for anybody to think that, to think any human being is thousands or millions of times better than the rest of the human beings in their population. I mean, there are people who are extraordinary, and they put in extraordinary work and effort, and they deserve a reward for that. But a 2-time reward, or a 4-time, or a 5-time, or 10 times reward should be about the limits. Why should anybody be more than 10 times more, paid more than 10 times someone else? I mean, work is work, sacrifice is sacrifice, and there's no reason to have these extraordinary and preposterous extremes.